everyone. How you doing? We're back here with another session on putting out the fires in online teaching and learning. Really honored to have this guest here in this conversation. I think is going to speak. I keep saying I think. I know. I don't think I know with this session because we're all feeling the pressures of the change that the pandemic has brought. And we know that even when things do move, I'm going to call it post-pandemic, we're still going to be faced with other scenarios that are going to bring out, a sense of stress and work overload and all these things. That's just part of life. We're just feeling it stronger than ever before. And so this conversation is really on the social emotional learning. And I think for this one, it's important that we're looking at it through the lens of not just students, which we do spend a lot of time on it, but these ideas and the messages that our guest is going to bring with us today also helps us as the educators, as the parents, as adults. Like, these are universal things. So I know we all know this, but sometimes we got to be reminded that this learning is just as important for us as it is for our students. But I'm already getting ahead of myself. Mark, let's start off with having everybody just know who you are. I'm sure for many people, they may or may not know about you, but they really need to because you're doing some fabulous work. So if you could introduce who you are, what you do, all that good stuff, and then we can dive into, the core work of what you're doing.
Okay, sounds like a plan. So, good day everyone. My name's Mark Sparvell. I'm an educator of 25 to 30 years, both as a classroom teacher, deputy principal, regional leader, and a sloppy academic working in post-compulsory years. I currently work for Microsoft in education marketing, and I guess, my sort of area of interest is where best practice meets next practice. I'm interested and intrigued by how technology, when it's levered thoughtfully, can help to humanize learning and not just simply digitize curriculum content. So I work in education marketing and I lead lots of research projects like the Class of 2030 and Emotion Cognition in the Age of AI. And these are research projects Microsoft undertakes with partners like McKinsey and Company and the Economist Intelligence Unit. And whether a school or a system is using Microsoft products or not, we make those research pieces available back. It's our contribution back to the profession to help generate conversations really around what matters most and how do we best support educators, school leaders, and systems to empower every learner on the planet to achieve more.
Yeah, I love it. And I mean, I'm such a fan and a follower of your work. I follow your journey through the social media channels. And, I've been fortunate enough to have some conversations with you in person here and there, even though that's been a while. And hopefully we'll be able to do that again sometime.
Wow.
But as here we are in this world, and we don't need to go through all the details of what people are facing. I think everyone kind of knows it. I mean, one of the positives is we all kind of have this grounding of what everyone feels. We all get it. You're doing a lot with social emotional learning, and I know it even moves beyond that. And you're speaking with countries, you're speaking with districts, you're doing the research. I want to start out generally here, and then we can dive into more specifics. Like, what are some of the main things that you're seeing, or some of the main research or ideas that are coming across, your desk and things that you're doing in this field, just to kind of set the context for people of what's being done. You have a global perspective that not all of us have. We kind of have our local lens. And so I'm just kind of curious of, kind of painting the canvas of what's out there. I think we know kind of the pressures, but there's also some solutions and good things out there that can be helpful. So let's start with that and then dive in deeper.
Yeah, no, Aaron, you touched on a really important thing there about that. Solutions are also out there. The COVID-19 isn't the only thing that's, spreads globally. Anytime that we're networked and connected, things spread. Certainly are challenges that we're facing, that you're facing, people that are watching this on demand or in a session. The challenges that you're facing are shared challenges across the globe. And the interesting bit and the comforting bit is the solutions to those challenges are also shared solutions because we are connected. And if we sort of ground this at that global level, since March, 1.6 billion students globally have had their formal learning interrupted in one way or another. And, make no mistake, it's not just a public health crisis. It's an economic crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. And education is placed smack bang in the middle of it. And the pressures on educators and school leaders are intense. I mean, it gives you goosebumps. Recently, CASEL, the Collaborative for Social and Emotional Learning, and Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence in March asked 5,000 educators, how are you feeling? And not surprisingly, anxious, uncertain, and stressed were the key words. Then MIT did some research they published in April, which I thought was interesting, which was, well, why do you feel this way? So we know you feel this way, but why do you feel this way? What are the things that are really, really kind of like getting you worked up? And they boiled down to three things. One was teachers were feeling really, really stressed out about student motivation, about how do I engage learners between the glass? How do I maintain social connectedness and relationships? How do I support my students to become self-reflective and more autonomous if they're learning when we're apart from one another? So student motivation was number one. Number two was this sense of professional loss and burnout. So educators themselves, when we're together, you know, we know this as educators, that schools aren't institutions where we deliver stuff. Schools are communities of professional practice and are places of learning for adults and children. And we know in schools that the social collisions between adults have a protective factor. You've had a bad day teaching, you're going to talk about it in the staff room. You're going to have a chat with somebody in the car park. You're going to meet one another in your non-contact time and plan together. And you're also going to complain together and you're going to learn together. And that's being human in the workplace. So professional loss is significant for teachers right now, as is burnout. So people in their vacation time are doing double time prepping for the new school year. They're doing double time to plan for face-to-face, but also online and somewhere in between. So that burnout and professional loss was number two. And number three, and you know, teaching is it's a profession that has a moral imperative and it has an emotional toil. And as a result of that, educators are feeling stressed by the inequities that they're seeing happening across their classrooms, their schools and their districts. So those existing inequities that have now been illuminated and highlighted is causing them great anxiety. How do I meet the needs of diverse learners? How do I meet the needs best for those who don't have access to a quiet place to study or access to a device, or maybe not even access to supportive family structures, which are going to allow them to be able to access the valued curriculum. So that's what I'm kind of seeing at that meta level. In terms of and we can go into this after, otherwise I'll talk forever. In terms of where things good are happening, they are across the globe and in the United States. So I've just started my own podcast series called Super Speaks, where I'm listening to superintendents across the US and asking them the hard questions about how things are going. What are the challenges? What are the successes? And the successes are there. You know, I've heard of districts up in Canada been measuring happiness and well-being across an entire district using data and analytics to help redirect and connect resources. I spoke to the superintendent of, I think it was Deval, the other day to find out how they were deploying devices and supporting students at risk. So across the states, there are really promising examples of districts and regions and individual schools, largely that were doing something before COVID, and then during COVID, they were able to scale up their efforts, and we can learn from them, and they'll help provide us a blueprint for the way forwards as we plan for a future that isn't a new normal, but a future that we can be sure is going to be complex, ambiguous, and changeable. So that's probably what we know.
Yeah,
Aaron?
no, I love it. Yeah, and as you shared there, I was scribbling down some notes here that as you were sharing, and I want to look at when you're talking about the MIT research on that idea of like just our moral imperative as educators. I always say like it's like the teacher DNA. Even when there aren't solutions, we still feel compelled to take on all the burden to make sure that our kids are taken care of and learning. And when we can't always provide that, when we feel inadequate, even though educators are not inadequate, but they feel that right now. This is new territory for a lot of them. Um, what are you seeing? Like, what are some ideas? Because I think one of my biggest fears is the educators I'm working with is they're at this burnout level that it's just not sustainable over the course of a whole year, and that's one of my big fears. And many of these other conversations. My wife's eighth grade algebra teacher. I worry about at what point she just can't sustain. She puts a
Yeah.
lot of pressure on herself. It's some of it's self-inflicted, some of it's system inflicted. We all know those things, but she's not alone in those thoughts, trying to do all the things all the time, and it's not good, and I appreciate it, I applaud it, but it's also not a healthy method. So if we were to look at that one, I think that's a key for a lot of educators, this moral imperative to be all the things to all the kids.
Yeah.
What are some ideas or strategies or maybe some things for them to explore? I want to dive there, and then you had some other great things I want to tap into, but I think that to
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
is real key for a lot of educators
Yeah.
right now.
And it's a connected thing, right? So as I said, and not glibly earlier, the coronavirus isn't the only thing that's, is easily transferred. Solutions are as well. Emotions are. So your kids will catch emotions from the educator. So educator wellbeing is really critical right now. And it's true what you're saying that, even the most amazing educators capable of doing this much. The job at the moment is this much. So everybody's going to be feeling like there's a deficit. I'm not doing enough. This isn't close enough, near enough. And I guess one bit of advice that I would give to all educators would be, think about what you've done today across this last week and let this be enough. To be able to, in a sense, adopt a bit of a beginner's mindset. And a beginner's mindset recognizes this is not anything like what we have done. This is something we are beginning. We're beginning it together. So a beginner's mindset allows you as a beginner, when I was learning to stand up paddleboard, I was clumsy, awkward. I felt embarrassed, stupid, frustrated, angry with myself, upset. What a waste of time and energy. I felt all of these things out there on Lake Washington. That's a beginner's mindset. Embrace that. That's what it feels like to be learning something new. For educators at the moment, changing their gears to this education reimagined, a beginner's mindset will help you because those emotions matter and they're all valid. They don't need to be suppressed. But as we move the conversation into sort of the place and space of social and emotional learning, it comes from the educator and the leader moving to a point where they recognize that at this moment in time, more so than any other place in time, emotions, all of them matter and are valid. The question is, are they serving a purpose that is useful for me at the moment? Do I want to stay in that emotional state? If so, great. But if I want to shift to another emotional state, let's say at the moment I'm feeling largely frustrated and anxious most of the time, and I don't want to be feeling joyful and delirious. That's high energy, pleasant emotion. That's probably not realistic. But maybe I'd like to angle for feeling a little bit comfortable and content. That would be good. How do I get from there to there? Right. So what we need to be doing is making those strategies intentional and not accidental. And it's a challenge for our leaders. Their number one priority should be educator well-being. Educators' number one priority should be our learner well-being, and developing social and emotional skills, boosting the emotional intelligence at the moment is fundamental. In the past, it could have been largely relegated as being it's ornamental. This is all about feeling nice. No, emotions are the gatekeeper to cognition, to motivation and attention. And when I hear teachers say we're stressed because students aren't motivated, think about it. If emotions are the gatekeeper of motivation, maybe the emotions aren't being invited in right now in an understandable rush to get up communications, to deliver curriculum, to get platforms up and running and assignment submissions happening. All important stuff. Emotions are the gatekeeper to cognition, motivation, and attention. The research published by the Aspen Institute in the States, the National Commission into the Study of Social and Emotional Learning and Academic Outcomes, made it very clear that the two are interrelated and cannot exist without one another. And we know from research across the globe over the last 25 years that a focus on emotional intelligence, which you build through social and emotional learning, provides a number of benefits outside of academic, improves your decision-making, the quality of your relationships, your physical health, your mental health, your performance and your creativity. And not just now. In a longitudinal study undertaken in the UK, they followed a group of kindergartners from the 1970s for 40 years to find out what impact social and emotional learning had on somebody's life. And they discovered through this study that the impact spread out for a lifetime. Less likely to be involved in trouble with the law, more likely to feel positive and have subjective well-being, more likely to engage in volunteer and civic activities, less likely to have mental health issues, addiction issues. The benefits were outstanding. So yeah, to go back to your original comment, for educators at the moment, mindset, whole school approaches to recognize that this is a significant topic that needs to be addressed, and specific strategies for educators to practice and rehearse themselves about developing social and emotional skills that they can pass on to their students. As small as doing emotional check-ins regularly, introducing this concept that the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence refers to as RULER: recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate, using tools like the mood meter, developing a charter for how do we want to feel at our school, how do we want to feel with our staff, or how do we want to feel in our classroom, which is the flip side of what are the rules that we need to follow. Both have got a place, but at the moment, yeah, Mark Brackett would say, we need more feelings and less rules.
Yeah, and I love that. I mean, it's a great segue to where my brain was heading to next, and you've already started to touch on that a little bit as you were talking about how important the emotional intelligence is. And I think about one of the other big, I'm going to call it a barrier that a lot of educators are facing right now is whether we call it student motivation, they're not coming to the calls, doing the work, whether we call it student engagement, or how do we increase interaction. You kind of hear these kind of phrases of help me with this. And there's been a lot of energy focused on teaching strategies or how to create lessons, or maybe it's using this tool or bringing this technique in. And there's not as much built on that emotional side. I think, it almost comes across, and I don't think it's anyone's intention, like if you just change your teaching practice, motivation will increase. And we're not having that conversation on the emotional circle where they intertwine and connect, like you were talking about. So as educators are trying to figure out how to go from that beginner mindset of all those feelings, and we've all been there, some of them are in that, right, they feel that way right now with teaching, but we feel that with our hobbies, and all those things, and we know our students feel that exact same way. This is new for them. How do we, what's that look like? Because I think one of the other fears that a lot of educators face is they want to put some of these practices in. They want to help, the kids work through their emotions, but some of the things out there feel cheesy. The kids, it kind of feels like, oh, this is a cute little lesson. And the student feels like, my teacher's just doing this thing because they have to do it. And therefore it just feels like fake movement that people are checking off boxes, even if that's not the intent. How do teachers, you talked a little bit about that, some like the ruler, you talked about, some of those little pulse checks. How do teachers weave that into the landscape with their practices?
Yeah, and that's that's doable. It's also the interesting kind of like tension and challenge, because there are complex answers and there are simple answers. What I like to do is to focus on, well, what can I do Monday, not someday? If I was back being principal of a school and I was talking to my staff and I said, hey, we've got to start paying careful attention to the social and emotional dimension, because learning is a social and emotional process. You know, learning is socially embedded. It's something we do best together. And it's through collaboration that we shift information from our short-term brain and we engage in that knowledge transfer into our long-term memory. It's where deep learning happens, right? So if you want deep learning, we've got to turn up the dials of emotional skills. That's the ability to recognize and regulate my own emotions. And then the social skills. How do I do that in a social setting? Make responsible decisions, build and maintain relationships, and at times even co-regulate emotions with one another. And the way to achieve that, if I was giving my, what do I do Monday, not someday? Here's what I did. We partnered with Goldie Hawn's Mind Up Foundation, and Goldie and I did a webinar, and I'll share the link with you to share out to people. What we intentionally did was we went out across the globe and we found 10 amazing educators who weren't all about technology and they weren't all about mindfulness, but they were all about getting the best out of their learners. And they shared their number one, what can I do Monday, not someday tip, to help invite in the emotional context in order to achieve not just people feeling good, but people doing good and doing better and feeling more connected and calmer and more focused. And those strategies ranged from, you know, the emotional check-in is good, but the emotional check-in that a clever teacher has planned over time to keep on introducing greater complexity of emotional language, that's different. Asking you, how do you feel? Okay, sad, bad, angry, mad. Give you a framework, engage you in some learning activities which have you maybe, let's say, get an emoji and match it to the word frustrated and discuss and debate. How is frustrated similar or different to angry? How is jealousy and envy? What's the difference between there? Suddenly you're getting into what people would call emotional granularity. That's the ability to accurately label emotions, to accurately be able to predict their impact on self and others. So, you know, little things that people can do are those emotional check-ins, are journaling, having students engaging in reflective private journaling at the end of each day. But again, the clever teacher introduces a structure and a framework to that and engages in that guided release over time, where the students are actually given a framework to reflect about the emotional context of the day, the social context of the day, what were the external triggers, what were the internal triggers. So those are a couple of quick ones. Another strategy that a teacher could do, let's say I'm a kindergarten teacher. The strategy could be, 2 leaves and a bud. At the end of the day, on the screen day or in a face-to-face day, the kindergarten teacher sits there and all of the kids identify, you know, the 2 leaves, the 2 things that they were grateful for across the day, and the 1 bud, the thing they're looking forward for till tomorrow. So do you see what's happened here? We would call this positive reframing. We would call this self-reflection. We would call this acts of gratitude. These are all things that neuroscience shows us rewires the brain. It sets in motion an app in the back of your head that starts scanning the files, looking for things that I'm grateful for today. And over time, it starts to run automatically, constantly scanning for the good. Doesn't discount or ignore the bad, but it doesn't seek to redirect our most limited natural resource, our attention. It doesn't redirect it always just to the bad. It gives us hope for the future. It positively reframes our mind. And in doing that, we're practicing this process of being grateful and expressing gratitude and also being optimistic about what is to come. So there are a couple of strategies from teachers, but we've got strategies all the way up to higher education from, or should I say, all the way up from kindergarten, which is at the highest point of complexity, through to higher education, what you can do Monday, not someday, to make this emotional stuff invitational, not just instructional. And so by instructional, I mean, hey, here's a worksheet, color in everything that shows kindness. That's sitting outside of the process of learning, which, as we know, is socially embedded. Inviting it in brings it into the learning process. And I can tell you in a few moments' time about a couple of feature updates that we've hardwired into some of our tools to help support teachers to make this more invitational.
Yeah, we'll definitely merge that in there. And before you get to that, because I think you're hitting on some key things that even I'm thinking about myself, and I know educators listening or watching are going to go, okay, this is bringing it into a different light that maybe we haven't thought about before. One of the things we were talking about prior to hitting record, we were talking about the importance of like collective efficacy for
Yeah.
teachers and the students. And I think this merges really well with what you were just sharing. Because I think now more than ever, a lot of us as educators and students, we are in isolation. You know, here I am,
Yeah.
I'm in my basement by myself doing work today. You know, students are in a room by themselves learning all day. Teachers are teaching if they're remotely, or, you know, your class isn't maybe as full as it used to be. And while that has some perks, you know, it's not the same. And if your school isn't open, we miss those opportunities that you talked about earlier. My 5 minutes in the hallway talking with my friend, the chit chat over lunch, our planning meetings. We have this feeling of isolation. And so while you're going through your ideas, that I would love for you to talk a little bit about that collective efficacy, because that's just as important. And as we're trying to rewire the brain, as you talked about, we also know one of the most important things too is I'm going to call it group thing. That might not be the right term for it, but having people in the journey along with you, so you don't feel like you're doing this alone. So could you
Yeah.
talk about that? I know it's the
Yep.
same, not always the same with that research. And then, yeah, definitely I want to get into some of the updates as well that you've got with your.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, it's a good one because humans are social. We always have been. You know, that's the way that as a species we've moved to the place and space we are, because we can collectively regulate. We can collectively work together to solve problems and challenges. It's where it has a predictive and a developmental kind of impact on us. And just before I talk about the efficacy, I was being interviewed yesterday, and I was talking about the impact of this isolation on young people. And I said, look, the big challenge isn't maths and science and spelling and reading. That's certainly complex. I'm not diminishing it. What's important for kids at school is, you know, that Aaron smiles at me in the morning when we're going up to the gate, and I know today's going to be a good day because Aaron's there and he's my buddy. Or, you know, I drop something and Melissa picks it up, or, you know, the cool kid, even though it shouldn't mean something to me, but the cool kid actually, you know, kind of gives me a high five in the corridor, or I make a new friend walking home, or 1,000 social collisions happen each and every day. And this is the fabric of the lives of students. It's what builds their sense of self, identity, character. They have a chance to explore identity waters, sometimes making mistakes and humiliating themselves along the way, but at other times practicing and rehearsing what it feels like and looks like to be in a social context. And that's one of the things at greatest risk in situations where we're behind the glass, which is why leveraging technology when you're limited to that as an engagement, to make sure we bring in those opportunities for small group work, one-to-one work, informal moments where the teacher is just sitting there eating their lunch and all of the kids are on the screen eating their lunch, inviting in the fun and the joy. You know, I saw an example the other day where all of the kids had put together all of the materials they needed to make a fort at home, blankets and pegs and torches and everything. And then they all recorded them on Flipgrid, and they had they called it a fortnight, but it was literally building forts. And onto the efficacy, this is a really important area because lots of things improve learning. And, you know, research, there's enough of that's been done for decades and decades and decades, that meta-analysis, so analysis of the analysis, have been undertaken. And John Hattie's is a really famous one. So all of these things, whatever they are, 50 of them, improve learning. Some of them improve learning a lot more. They have a greater effect size. Number one at the top of the list is collective teacher efficacy. So when a group of teachers believe that they have the skills and that they're supported to make a difference, they do. It's as simple as that. And the effect size is way above anything else. It's way above additional homework or reduced class sizes or personalized learning approach, whatever. The highest effect size is when a group of teachers feel that they can make a difference together. And that's the key bit, together. This is why professional learning communities matter. This is why learning together matters so much for educators. We did our own research in 2011, a bit old now, the Innovative Teaching and Learning Research, undertaken by SRI International. And we asked across the globe this question around what professional learning makes the biggest difference? Well, it was the same finding. When a group of teachers try something new together and then spend time talking about the impact on learners, was, whoa, right up there. Right down the bottom was listening to a lecture. Listening to a lecture still has an impact, but the huge impact was what we do together. And interestingly, number 5 on John Hattie's meta-analysis for making the biggest difference to learning, the biggest impact, is when students themselves develop the sense of efficacy, that they start to believe that they have the skills, that they have the mindset, that they have the support to do well. When they believe they can, and when they can accurately predict how they're going, they do better. So that student who goes, hey, this piece of work I'm submitting, it's maybe not my best. I think it's probably a 78%, but they're actually going to do better than that by the sheer fact that they're self-aware, which comes back to one of the key social and emotional learning sort of organizers: self-awareness, self-regulation, responsible decision-making, social awareness. You know, it ties back to that space. And this is why student self-assessment is so important right now in online, in hybrid models. This is why students themselves should be doing the teaching right now in this online, offline mode, getting groups of students to plan and deliver that lesson. It doesn't even matter what the lesson is. The learning is going to be kicked out of the park, especially the self-assessment tied to how well the group functioned, how effective they were, the measures of success that they generated, and so on. So there are some kind of ideas around efficacy.
Yeah, no, it's so good, Mark. And this is just, it's such great stuff. It's such important work. And you really shed some light, I think, even for me. I mean, for those watching the video, I mean, I'm scribbling notes like wildfire of things I need to go reflect on my own practices and ideas, as well as diving into some research. And so as we wrap this up, to be respectful of your time, because I know you're incredibly busy and we want to make sure that the educators get some time to move into action, because you're giving them lots of really helpful things. Let's talk a little bit about, as we wrap up, some of the updates to the tools. If educators are looking to get started into some of this, where do they go? I mean, obviously we'll link it all into the PD and all that stuff too, anything that you mentioned, but they're just going, okay, you've got me sold. I'm ready. This is making sense. I haven't been doing this. I need to, or I need to strengthen this, but I don't know where my first step is or where to get started. Where do they go to start to generate some of these ideas and strategy, resources, whatnot?
Yep. Okay. So again, there's probably what can I do Monday and there's what can I do someday. So allow for people's time and pressure. For the Monday, and I'll share the link with you, I'm constantly updating a deck. When you take from one person, it's stealing. When you take from lots, it's research. So I'm taking from the best practice I see from teachers, really practical, tried and tested practice to help develop emotional vocabulary, to help close feedback loops, and to help invite emotion into the learning. And it's in a deck of, there's 15 strategies to try Monday, all teacher tested. So I'll make sure you've got the link to that.
Sure.
All of them are free. I mean, they range from the use of, OneNote through to Flipgrid, or just even simply using Word. And if people don't have, Office, Microsoft staff, Microsoft 365, including Teams, is completely free for students and educators and always will be. So there's no sort of barrier of entry there. In terms of maybe longer term things to think about, we've released some product updates. We know from research undertaken by the World Economic Forum, New Vision for Learning, Technology and Social and Emotional Skills, and I can send the link to the paper. One of the key findings there was that where social and emotional learning features are built right in to the tools that the students are already using, then they have a greatest impact as opposed to separate.
Mm.
So we've put together, it's taken about 18 months, but we've built some features in Teams called praise, social and emotional learning badges. And these are tied to 5 character traits and some specific social and emotional skills that underpin them. It's a globally recognized and psychologically sort of evaluated framework. And this means that student to student can provide a specific praise for around a social and emotional skill, or a teacher to student or teacher to teacher. And of course, the data then is sitting beneath with all that other data that you might have at a school level around assignments or who's online, who's offline, who's contributed, who's done this and that. That's all important. Now we're starting to get information about social and emotional skills being recognized and validated. We took those same badges and we turned them into digital stickers in OneNote. And again, the notion here isn't, yes, they're cute and they're colorful and they look great. They also introduce the language of social and emotional skills in a very intentional, not accidental way. So the teacher, Mr. Aaron, he can give Mr. Mark a very specific persistence sticker and digital ink the reason why, as opposed to just a good job or nice. Now we can start to name them, and we know you've got to recognize, understand, label, express if you want to regulate. And then the third feature, and these were released in a blog just last week, is called Reflect. And it sits within Microsoft Teams, and it's kind of like a poll. And you can ask your class, if you like, how are you feeling just before we start this topic on, AP chemistry? Or you can ask the question, how did you feel about, the first week of hybrid learning? Or you can simply set it to automatically ask every Monday morning, how are you feeling about the week ahead? And this will answer that big question. How is the student feeling? Collectively, how is my class feeling? How is my school feeling? If I'm the principal, I can get a litmus paper test of every person connected to that. And how is my district feeling? So you start to, again, get these insights around the emotion, and then you can take action around that. Or you can look for the hot spots of success and go, wow, it seems to be there's something really great happening in this part, in this collection or cluster of schools. What's happening there? What are they doing around well-being that seems to be shifting the needle? Can we all learn from that? So there are some examples of what can you do Monday. Use some of the ideas from that deck that I'll share, the SEL Top 10. I run a Facebook group called SEL in Edu, not surprisingly. I'll send the link. The SEL in Edu group has just hit 7,200 members globally, and it's not about technology, but it is about pedagogy and well-being and evidence-based approaches. So you're welcome to share that out, and people might like to join that group and continue the conversation, but also contribute to it.
Yeah, and I know, just to speak, I'm in that group, and what's amazing is not just the name of the group, but like people live by the motto of what the group's about too. The amount of support and the sharing and just the troubleshooting. It's a very lively, active group, and so if you're looking again to find other people who are trying to work through these things and have good ideas and good resources and just a good place to ask questions, it is phenomenal. I've asked many questions in there to try to get insights for my own learning as well as for others, and it is a wonderful group. And so, Mark, I can't thank you enough for taking time to speak with us. More importantly, for all the work that you do, the messages, the research, and just all the things that you've got going on. It really fits cohesively to what really matters, and it's taking care of ourselves, taking care of others. And if we can do that and learn how to kind of regulate our emotions, understand where we're coming from, and identify it and all those things, then the academic learning can really strengthen. And I think so much of the time, as to no fault of anyone, the pressure is to academic content so quickly, we lose sight of how important taking care of ourselves or others, our social emotional state. And if we don't build into that academic learning is never going to reach where we want it to, and so they for a lot of us, there's two parallel paths, but it can't be like we do this and then this and then this. Like they've got to
Yeah.
run together. And if we do that and really invest the time especially when it feels like we don't have enough time,
Mm-hmm.
the payoffs are going to be huge, not just for the learning, but for just better humans and citizens in the world, to continue to make the proper changes that we all need, as the world continues to give us new opportunities to figure out what is best for everyone. So I can't
Hmm.
thank you enough for all that you do.
Hey, no, that's my pleasure. And I was glad that you said that. The aim of the game is to, how do we produce first-class humans, not second-class robots?
Mm,
And how do we use technology to humanize learning to make sure young people are seen, are heard, and know that they matter, which these days, given the current context, is the most significant thing. This is why kids are stressed, because they feel they're not heard, they're not seen, and they have no control over their lives. So to be seen, to be heard, to matter and have some choice is one of the challenges for all of us as educators in our instructional design, and also how we invite emotion into the learning environment. So thanks very much for the time to chat. I'll send through some links to you, our social and emotional learning resource page, and links to some of the research, and just ask that you share those out with people.
yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much, Mark, for all your time.
Awesome.